So I just want to say again, thank you for getting on this with me.
No
I
problem.
really appreciate it. My first question is, when did you realize you want to become a sports journalist?
It was a long time ago. I got into sports probably when I was. I mean, I wasn't super young. I was probably like, I don't know, 8 or 9. I mean, it wasn't like when I was 4. And I started paying attention, and I like to write, and I
Mhm.
found myself, back in those days, there was certainly no cable or ESPN, and we would get the newspaper, and we had just moved to Arizona a couple of years before that, and I didn't know a lot about basketball at that point, but the Suns were the one pro team in town,
Mhm.
and I would, listen to some of their games. I would get the box score out of the paper, and then I would write a little game story off the box score before I would read whatever they wrote about the game, just to try and practice a little. I mean, I'm sure it was terrible, but I remember doing those things, and it just kind of grew. I mean, I loved playing sports. I knew I wasn't going to be good enough necessarily to do those long term. So it was something to keep me in around sports, and by doing something I loved, which was at the time writing.
That's pretty cool. Phoenix, what, 90? So you graduated from Arizona State in 92 right
Yeah.
away. That's the year they made the finals, right, with Barkley? Was it 90?
It would have been the following season. So it would have been the 92-93 season when the Suns made the finals. Yes. So, I mean, I was lucky enough that growing up, the Suns were always pretty good, except for one little area. And then, clearly they had that run with the Barkley era, and then a little bit later when Nash came back. So, I mean, uh, not only am I been lucky enough that the Suns have done well growing up here, but I was also fortunate enough when I was working for a newspaper to do a bunch of different things, cover a bunch of different sports. And so I've covered a handful of Suns playoff games. I've been on a Suns road trip, that kind of thing.
Hmm. What jobs did you take out of college?
So I didn't plan it super well. I
Mhm.
wasn't as aggressive as perhaps I should have been at the time. Um, but I lucked into something. Right when I was graduating, and I hadn't really worked hard to find something. Uh, my hometown paper, my tiny hometown paper at the time, um, I had done some freelance work for the Phoenix Gazette, which was the afternoon paper here, and my editor, who I'd gotten to know, he had gone to Arizona State with a guy who worked in the sports department at this paper, and he'd found out that their 30-hour a week high school reporter had just been let go, so they needed somebody. It had been literally the day before, and my editor calls me and he says, you might want to look into it. I called their editor. He was surprised I even knew they had an opening, and I had the job within probably a week. So I lucked out very much there. Now, I didn't last very long there because they had monetary issues, and I was laid off after 3 months. So that made for some interesting times trying to figure out what I was going to do after that. But it got my foot in the door and got me some contacts, and I kind of went from there.
It's definitely getting your foot in the door. And I saw in 2000 you received the beat writer job for the Cardinals for the East Valley Tribune. Then 2007 you became the writer for the Cardinals website. How accomplished did you feel once you achieved those jobs?
Well, the becoming the Cardinals beat writer, that almost came up in a backwards kind of way when I was at the newspaper. I had covered high schools for a long time. My boss there wanted to get me off of high schools and kind of move me up the food chain. I was originally going to be covering Arizona State basketball when
Hmm.
that plan first got rolled out. But by the time the next basketball season came around, there was major changes on the beat, and he decided to switch a bunch of people up, and I ended up covering the Phoenix Coyotes hockey team for a season. And I didn't know, I knew some about hockey. I certainly didn't know a lot. I didn't, but it was fun, and I enjoyed my season, and I thought I was going to be able to do that going forward. And there were more changes after that year. And I ended up basically being a backup writer for all the pro sports. So I got to cover Diamondbacks playoffs. It turned out the Suns games I was talking about, a couple of Cardinals games. I still did some hockey games. So it kind of gave me a taste of everything. And after that one year, our Cardinals writer decided to take a job in Denver covering the Broncos. And I was offered the Cardinals job, and I took it. And I was lucky I did, because I think that's turned out very well for me, obviously. And I did that for 7 seasons at the newspaper before the team reached out to me and asked me if I'd be interested in working for them and doing the website stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty phenomenal getting that job. I got to give it to you. Did you have any mentors in the beginning that helped you shape who you are now?
Oh, I don't think there's any question. It's hard to get anywhere, I think, without some mentorship. Just because when you're beginning, you just don't have the experience that you need, and you don't know what you don't know, kind of thing. So Tom Blodgett, who is the aforementioned editor when I was doing the high schools for the Phoenix Gazette, he was a guy that was very important to me going forward, in terms of when I was in college, and then right early on in my career. And then when I got to the Tribune, especially, I had another friend of mine, actually, who's more my peer, but after I got laid off from the small Scottsdale paper, I still did some freelance for a few months, and then I needed to find a full-time job. I ended up getting a job at the paper in Flagstaff, Arizona, which is up north, where northern Arizona is. And I worked at that paper for a year and a half, and I met somebody there. He was the assistant sports editor when I first got hired. He was only there 2 months while I worked there before he left, but we're still good friends to this day. And he served as a kind of a peer mentor in a lot of ways, Jim Carty. And then when I got to the Tribune, I had a few guys that were very willing to help me out. When I first got there, I was one of the younger writers. But Scott Bordeaux, who he was the columnist there, he had been there a long time. He was somebody that I could bounce a lot of stuff off of over the years, and he was a main one for me too. So yeah, there were clearly been guys that have been important to me and kind of helped move me along, and tell me things that I should and shouldn't be doing, and help me with some of my process. Yes.
It's pretty good. Would you consider like connections an important part of the job?
Yes.
In the beginning?
I mean, we all want to believe that it's always talent that gets you to where you're going. But I mean, I do believe I'm talented. Don't get me wrong. And I'm not trying to say that egotistically, but I'm not saying that I'm some terrible person that just lucked into all these jobs because of who I knew. But at the same time, it does make a difference. I mean, if you just look at my pattern of jobs, I already told you that I got that first job out of college because my editor called and told me there was an opening. I got laid off. And the reason I got the job in Flagstaff was because they had an opening, and somebody I knew from my college paper, who was working on the news desk up there, told the sports editors there that I might be somebody who could be looking for a job. And he reached out to me and asked me if I'd be interested. And that's how I ended up interviewing for that job and getting that job. And then once I went back up there, not trying to get too confusing, but the small paper that I got laid off from the first time, after they laid me off, they eventually bought up by the Tribune newspapers, and there was a conglomeration of newspapers. So the people that were working in Scottsdale were basically the old Scottsdale Progress people. So when I wanted to get out of Flagstaff and try and get back to the Valley of the Sun, they knew me. And when they had an opening, ironically, basically doing the same thing I was doing at the Scottsdale Progress the first time, only with a bigger circulation, they knew me and they hired me back. So I knew them. And then I was at the Tribune for a number of years, obviously. And the reason I got the job with the Cardinals was I had covered them for 7 years, and the people in the organization knew me. And when, I didn't have to apply, they came to me and they said, would you be interested in doing that? And we kind of went from there. So in reality, for me, every single job I've ever gotten is because of somebody I knew or they knew of me. So yeah, it is important. I think contacts are important. I mean, you still have to do good work. There have been people that I know that I've looked at that have tried to get jobs when I've been hiring, and I don't necessarily hire them because I know them. If it's not a right fit to hire them, it still doesn't make any sense. But I've also found that compatibility is a big deal. I've made a couple of hires with people that I thought I knew, but I didn't know real well, but I liked their work. And then when I got with them on a daily basis, it did not work. So there's a lot of that involved too. And it all goes into, when you're talking about looking for jobs, it's about being good at your job, but it's also, to me, about making sure you're leaving good impressions, because your job is so much more than just the product you do. It's also getting along and working alongside other people.
I get what you're saying. They're definitely an important part. I was just going to the Cardinals now. So the Cardinals, you covered 20 years. We've seen some pretty amazing seasons. Talking about started with the Core Warner, they made the Super Bowl, and then Carson Palmer. Is there any specific season that you're like, this is my favorite season I've ever covered?
I don't know if they're, I mean, obviously the ones they've done really well in are the best ones. I mean, it's hard to top 2008 when they made the run to the Super Bowl, because that team, it was moving up, but nobody thought they were going to get to the Super Bowl. I certainly didn't. And the way that season started, they started 7-3, and then NFC West was not a good division in those days. So at 7-3, they had basically locked things up. Then they stumbled to the finish and finished 9-7, and people were calling them the worst playoff team ever. And they got their doors blown off in week 16 in New England. They lost like 47-7, and it just looked bad. I mean, they were going to make the playoffs for the first time in a few years, in a decade, but you didn't think they were going to last very long. And then all of a sudden, Larry Fitzgerald has this amazing sequence of playoff games, and they just hit the stride at the right perfect time. And the reality is if they had been able to come up with one stop in the Super Bowl, they would have won that game. So it's hard to top the 2008 season, especially that playoff run. I mean, I would say that, beyond getting married and having my children, that month, 5 weeks of the postseason in 2008 was, probably the best time of my life.
How has it been covering Larry Fitzgerald's career?
I mean, he's a good dude. I mean, I've been doing this long enough that, I'd already covered the team for 3 or 4 seasons when he got drafted. So I've obviously been around his whole career. You obviously get to know him pretty well. In fact, I'm working on a story right now, and I was hoping he was going to be able to give me a comment for it. And I was able to text him yesterday, and he got back to me within 10 minutes. I mean, that's kind of a cool thing.
That's pretty cool.
Mostly because now I can write my story, but it's not, to be able to have that kind of relationship with somebody that I know a lot of people know. I mean, that is kind of cool. But, one thing you find as you work in pro sports, and partly as you get older too. I mean, I was somebody who, when I was young, you idolize athletes, and you think sports are the coolest thing in the world. And as you get around it, and as you work in the job, I mean, you realize it is a job for them, and some of the luster does get taken off as you're around it, because you realize it's just guys who happen to be good in this one thing. And instead of being doctors or, plumbers, they're athletes. And, some guys are good guys and some other guys aren't as good, and that's just how it's going to be. And it kind of changes a little bit of your perspective, I think, in a good way. But, I think with Larry, I've been very privileged to be able to be around his career. I've been very privileged to have known him this whole time. I'm lucky enough that when he talks about sometimes the length of his career and being around the media and everything, I'm lucky enough that he'll name check me sometimes. So he knows me well enough to do that. And that makes me proud, not only because he knows me, but because I feel like I've left an imprint on what I do with somebody like him.
Yeah, Fitzgerald definitely made. Hopefully he stays 2-3 more years, get that Jerry Rice record maybe.
We'll see. I don't know about that, but we'll see.
Yeah, most likely not. But is there any specific players or coaches that you have like a great relationship with?
Yeah, there's been a few over the years. None that I'm necessarily, even working with a team, I've tried to be pretty careful. I'm still, it's not like you're working for a newspaper, but at the same time, I'm not trying to like write fluff pieces all the time. I'm trying to be honest, so that if you want to read something about the Cardinals and their coverage, that you can come to our website and you're still getting something quality, and it's not just, oh, it's just the team talking about how great they are, even though they won 4 games in the season, whatever.
Mhm.
So, but over the years, I mean, I've gotten to know some guys really. I mean, one guy that I know fairly well is Adrian Wilson, who is a Pro Bowl safety, played a decade with us. I've gotten pretty tight with him, and I've enjoyed that. And he ended up coming back, and he works in the organization in the player personnel department now. And, he's one guy, but there's been lots of guys I've had good relationships with. I mean, I don't, again, not that I'm super close with anybody, but guys that I've really been comfortable with, or like having good conversations with. Tony Jefferson, he was a safety. I feel like I had a really good relationship with Tyrann Mathieu. Kurt Warner knows who I am. I mean, like I said, I wouldn't be say I'm super close to him, but if I texted Kurt, I think he'd get back to me. So yeah, I mean, it's just natural. I mean, in a lot of ways, especially working for the team, you're all employees of the same place. So they're gonna see you around. They're gonna see you around a lot, and they're your coworkers in some ways.
It's pretty crazy, like texting the big time players, talking to them. Have you ever been starstruck, you would consider?
Not really. I will say when I first started covering the Cardinals, and this would be back in 2000, and I have to dial it back to like when I first got into sports. It was like when I was 8 or 9 years old, and I didn't know much about it. And my mom happened to buy a Pittsburgh Steelers jersey at a garage sale down the street, a Lynn Swan Pittsburgh Steelers jersey. And she got it for me right around the time the Steelers were playing the Cowboys in the second time they played each other in the Super Bowl. So that would have been the 78 season, the 79 Super Bowl. And my dad had it on, and I wore the jersey, and they won. So I became this gigantic Steelers fan. And this was, the Cardinals didn't move to Arizona until 1988. So it's not like we had a team. So I was this huge Steelers fan, and I knew everything about those Steeler teams. Even though I was like 9, 10 years old, I do reports on them in class and everything. Well, flash forward to when I first started covering the Cardinals, their defensive line coach was Joe Green, Mean Joe Green, who was one of the best defensive linemen of all time. And that intimidated me a little bit. I mean, he kind of came across as kind of gruff anyways. So that was a little intimidating, but I just couldn't believe that I would have the chance sometimes to talk to Mean Joe Green. It was just crazy. But he was a good guy, and he was a good interview. And but I would say really that's truly the only time that I've really been truly starstruck. Once I started covering the Cardinals with the team, that was pretty much gone, because you grow up a little bit yourself, and you see these guys as who they are, which is just guys doing their work. It's just as a football player.
Yeah, I could definitely see if I hopefully one day I'll be something like that. Like my inspiration from was always a random guy, but Mari Stoudemire. I always loved him. Never met him, a little crazy. But
Yeah.
I gotta ask the next question is, in the MLB playoffs, we saw a crazy question to Walker Buehler. It was like, why were your pants so tight in a playoffs loss? Have you ever seen a crazy question asked like that?
Yes, I'm trying to remember off the top. I know I have. Well, first of all, I don't know how much you watch like Super Bowl media days. They're now on Monday nights, but they used to be on Tuesday afternoons at the Super Bowls. And I've covered 8 or 9 Super Bowls, and those are designed to have some crazy people with crazy questions, and they come in with a puppet on their hand or whatever from a Mexican radio station, or Entertainment Tonight shows up something, and so they ask crazy questions like that. But in terms of a regular press conference, yeah, I'm sure there's been a couple. And for somebody like me, that's tougher, because if you're trying to get regular stuff going on and then you get that kind of question, it's hard. And I wish I had a good example for you right now, but I don't. Unfortunately. But I know I've been sitting there before and going, why are you asking this question? Why is that even important? But it's funny when you bring up the Walker Buehler thing, because let me back it up. And it's not necessarily a crazy question in terms of like the reason the Walker Buehler thing was interesting is because it became a huge topic on social media, right?
Yeah,
So
I think it's number one trending on Twitter.
yeah. So in some ways that made sense that it was a crazy question, but it made sense. So in 2010, the Cardinals were playing on Monday Night Football, and they got their doors blown off at home. And the Monday Night Football cameras caught quarterback Derek Anderson at the time talking with Deuce Latouille, who was one of the offensive linemen, and they caught him, and it was late in the game, and it was like 21-3 or 20, and they played terribly, and they caught him like laughing, not chuckling, but like laughing, and it looked really poor. And we're sitting at the game, and me and Kent Summers, who was the beat writer at the time for the Arizona Republic, we start getting all these tweets from fans going, "What the hell is Derek Anderson laughing about? We're getting our ass kicked. Why is he acting like a jerk and not caring?" So after the game, Kent brought it up, and he said, the TV cameras caught you laughing, and what's the deal? And Derek tried to answer it, but he was clearly defensive, and Kent kept pushing it. And finally, Derek got really angry and kind of snapped. And he said, "I take this stuff." He didn't say stuff. "I take this stuff serious." And if you look up actually on YouTube or Google, and you look at like Derek Anderson post-game rant or something, you can still see it. But that was Kent. And again, you're asking about something that was shown briefly on the TV, but because of social media and everything, it caught a life of its own. And so, yeah, that's one that in particular that I really remember.
Yeah, that would definitely get people going. Derek Anderson, that's an old man. I remember watching him, but he was solid for times. I remember, but
yeah, he was. By the time his one season with the Cardinals was very up and down. It was the year after Kurt Warner retired, so the team was not in a good place. So didn't go
well. How different did it feel covering the Cardinals this season with COVID-19?
It was very different. It was difficult. I'm a guy, because I work for the team in normal times. I basically can go down to the locker room, not all the time, but a lot of times. I mean, I know when I can go, but I can definitely go more than regular media, and I can go and try and find players and talk to players. And I haven't been able to do that at all. I haven't had any face-to-face with players, which is difficult. And, you're doing everything over Zoom, all the interviews. I feel like I did the best job I could with the work that I do, but there's no way it could be as good as when you normally get a chance to talk to more players and you can have more intimate conversations. It just was tough. And then when you're covering games and there's hardly anybody in the stands or nobody in the stands for a couple of the games, it was just a whole different vibe. And let's just say I'm desperately hoping that there's enough vaccine out there by the time we get to the next regular season that we can have some semblance of regular. If we got to wear masks during games, I can deal with that. But if there's masks, but like we can still go to locker room and there's fans in the stands, I can deal with that.
Yeah, definitely. So we've seen this offseason, we've already seen Andre Hopkins trying to recruit JJ Watt. Any specific moves that you want the team to make?
You know what? Not particularly. I mean, I have moves that I think they're going to make, or maybe they should make in terms of positions. I'm not somebody who sits there and for a couple of reasons, you're not going to sit there and bang the table for one guy or another. That's not really what my role needs to be. I don't work for an independent outlet. I'll make the point that, yeah, they probably need to get a second receiver, whether they draft one or they sign one as a free agent. And yeah, if they don't re-sign Patrick Peterson, they're hurting at cornerback. I'm going to make those points. Who they should actually take or pick up, I don't know. I mean, I don't study the tape like that. I don't know what JJ Watt has left. And I certainly don't know what kind of contract he's looking for. And those things are incredibly important when you talk about, whether you should sign a free agent or not. I mean, if he's out there asking for $12 million a year, I don't know if JJ Watt's still a $12 million a year player. And I'm not saying he isn't, but I don't have the information to really make that call. So my point with JJ Watt is I could see him making a fit. If they decided to sign him, I could see why they would do it. And I kind of would go from there rather than be super strong and say, you bang the table and say, you've got to sign him or you shouldn't sign him.
That's true. What was your initial reaction when the Cardinals acquired Hopkins last season? I don't think everybody kind of thought that was an amazing trade.
Yeah, it was an amazing trade. I was sitting right here when the news came across, and I was stunned. I didn't think at first. I didn't know the Texans were trying to get rid of him, which, as we now know that they were. Um, and I was equally stunned at the price they paid. I mean, up until that point, and if you recall, David Johnson, the running back, was part of the trade.
Mhm.
I didn't know how the Cardinals were going to get out from underneath David Johnson's contract. He was guaranteed $10 million. It was money they did not want to spend. And I did not think there would be any team that would be willing to take him in a trade so that they would have to spend it. And so not only did the Cardinals get DeAndre Hopkins, but to offload that contract was just unbelievable to me. And, I think it's got to be up there with one of the best trades ever by a team for what they got and what they were able to get out of it.
Yeah, that was definitely a bizarre trade. Helping Kyler develop, it looks like Hopkins had a incredible season over there for sure. I have another question, and what would be your biggest recommendations to young writers?
It's harder for me, excuse me, to talk about this stuff these days because the landscape has changed so dramatically from when I first got out. I mean, when I first got out, if you were a writer, you went to a newspaper. There was no internet in 1992, not real internet, not like where you're going. The newspapers didn't have internet. You got a newspaper. And there were so many more opportunities for writers, for regular jobs. And I think there's other opportunities out there, but it frightens me sometimes a little bit because I get worried that young writers can get taken advantage of because of these media companies that know there's enough people out there to do it and not enough jobs, so they can squeeze the salaries down. That bothers me.
Hmm.
But from overall, I would say the key to any writing is going to be practice and get reps. And for me, uh, once I got to college, it was working on my school newspaper where I got a lot of reps, and then also doing the freelance covering high school sports. And in those days, I could get a regular gig during the high school season where I was getting something once or twice a week, and it got me reps. It got me in a newspaper, and it got me real editing so that people could see what I was doing and they could tell me what I was doing wrong. And writing, a lot of it is just about doing it so often that you just get good at it. And as you come along, you can get a little faster at it while you're still good and all that stuff. But it's like anything else, experience matters. um,
Hmm.
and you want your college degree, but the college degree isn't the biggest thing. I mean, when I've hired people, I want to make sure they have a college degree, but I don't look where it's from, and I don't know what your GPA is. I want to see the work you've done and make sure that you, again, have a college degree, and that's what you're looking at. And ultimately, that's what it's going to come down to is people hiring. They want to see the work you've done, because the rest of it, there's no way to measure it. They want to see how you're going to do in the job that they're hiring you for.
That's definitely an important part, I feel like. But those are all my questions. You answered them amazingly. I appreciate it. Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I appreciate the offer. I wish you luck going forward, and I applaud the fact that you're trying to be proactive even early in your college career, trying to hook up with people and try and figure some of this stuff out.
Thank you. I appreciate it greatly.
No problem.
Have a great day. I
All right,
appreciate it.
Icky.